This is a talk about WPF, which is the new GUI from Microsoft. It is, I have to say, I've been very impressed with it. And I shall just go through. I haven't actually got anything particularly prepared speech-wise. I've just got a set of slides which is going to act as a guide for me to go through them. And I will try and explain each slide as I get to them. So if anybody has any questions, wants anything in more detail, then we can meander through. So and again, this first slide is just a sort of bit of a joke, really. It's sort of saying, you know, you can't see the wood for the trees, and this is sort of you can't see the words for the letters. And really, the purpose of this talk is to try and make more sense of the WPF, make it as simple as it is. And really, from whatever everybody says, you know, it looks enormous when you start, but when you actually start looking at more details, it actually becomes simpler. So that was just a small animation. This entire presentation has been written using Dyalog and WPF because everybody shows you small little gimmicks and little bits and pieces. And I thought it was about time as a sort of small demonstration of an application. So I thought I'd actually try and write the whole thing in Dyalog and WPF. Now, if you want to actually use WPF with Dyalog, at the moment, the latest incarnation of WPF is WPF 4. So it is actually becoming quite a mature product now. Earlier ones were a little flaky. You also therefore need .NET 4 on your machine. Dyalog 12.1 is also necessary. If you wish to use the ribbon, Microsoft have now got a ribbon that is free to use and is native to WPF. It was only released in July, so it probably could do with another bug fix and release whatever through. There are commercial ones that are available as well, but this is a native one to WPF supplied. And also at the moment, short term, until Dyalog fix it, you do need a config file because Dyalog tends to pick up .NET 3 rather than 4. So all of this information you need is actually on a thing here. It's Karen and Andy here who have actually got copies. You don't actually need it now, but if you wish to take away the examples that I'm showing you, they're all on this stick. They will be available at the stand, and also they have them as well. So all of this is on here. So that's basically that. And as I say, the whole thing is totally new. It was taken from Microsoft. They basically started completely from scratch. They got some people in. They wrote it. It's all based on DirectX now, not on Win32 as it used to be. That's much better in areas because it's better supported by hardware and what have you because of used by gaming. It has a very much simpler recursive rendering mechanism. It's very similar, if you like. It just is like APL, it can recurse. So you start off with an object, you build another object on top, and you'll draw that, and just keep going through whatever you define. There are the concept of logical and visual trees. This is just the way the thing is structured. So you have the logical, you have a button that's connected to this, that's connected to that, but also within that you have the individual parts that make up the button. These can also be changed and modified. And again, it's fully integrated with .NET. The important thing is it's also the same really as Silverlight, or certainly the GUI part of Silverlight, and APL Sharp. So anytime invested in learning it for using applications, you also can use it for the up-and-coming APL Sharp and the stuff that's coming. As I say, on the downside, you've got the... it is rather daunting when you first see it. Some of the concepts are different to the current GUIs we're using, but it really is fairly simple once you get into it. So most of the documentation available is for non-APL, so you have to translate it a bit, but again, we tend to do that often. And that's it. But the most important thing is the last sentence at the bottom. You can actually use it at the same level you use the current GUIs, and it can be as simple as the current GUIs, but it also gives you a lot more scope for extension and other features. So you can start at the entry level and just emulate what you've got now, or you can take it much further. Now, there are two ways of using it. This is the way that people recommend and document it. It's called Zamel. Now, Zamel is effectively XML that has been extended, and you can mark up all of your GUI in XML. And within the C# world, this is quite good. You can use a tool like Expression Blend or Visual Studio 2010. You can give it to a non-APL person or a non-C# person. They can build their GUI using an editor, provide you with some Zamel There is normally a file behind which contains your C# code, and the two together form your class to actually go through. This is then compiled, and it's quite efficient. Now, you can also use Zamel with APL, and the slight disadvantage is that it's not compiled, so therefore it is less efficient to load. But it means that you can give it to a non-APL person, say, design your GUI, and then I'll work with whatever you design. And so, you know, if you actually use Zamel, you have to use the 3 lines at the bottom at the beginning of any part of Zamel. These are the links to the various parts of the system that you need. And so you'll see, certainly the first 2, for every piece of Zamel that's written, you need to put those in. The third one is if you use the ribbon that Microsoft are producing. Or you can use APL. And you can use APL directly and not go anywhere near Zamel if you wish. And it's flexible, it can be changed, it can be written on the hoof, as it says there. And this is another way, but again, you have disadvantages of the thing. If you use APL, then you have to use something called quad using. And this, I mean, if you think about .NET as an analogous to a workspace that somebody's given you, with lots of namespaces in it and lots of subroutines, lots of APL code, if you like, then this has been given to you to use. Then quad using is analogous to quad path in Dyalog. And so if you actually come and want to use something within the .NET workspace, if you like, and the interpreter can't find it, then if you have quad using set, it knows where to go and find the namespace, and think exactly the same way that quad path is used with namespaces in Dyalog. I have been lazy in this case, and I have got one function called WPF using, and this gives me a long quad using. Now, this is inefficient if you're writing a proper system, because if you wish to use one of the subroutines and what have you within WF, and it's not there, APL goes through the quad using to find it, so it actually goes through each of the sets of DLLs to find what you're looking for. The way you would normally use it with APL would be to have a small quad using, so if you're using a particular subset, a few subfunctions, whatever, you would only put the quad using that you were using for that particular part, localize it, and then go on. The same way you would use quad paths. You don't supply a vast list of 25 or 30 namespaces if you're using that. So, or you can use both. All Zamel does is create a .NET object. So you don't have to have one big Zamel code to define your entire screen. You can define a button in Zamel or something else. And as long as it defines a distinct object, that's all the Zamel you need. So you actually can have 10 or 15 small pieces of Zamel, which you can use, plus APL that links them together. And I think this is the best way of using it for us, because if you find something you want to do on the net, it's quoted in Zamel, then you can just lift the Zamel from the internet, use that piece of Zamel, but then the rest of it can be APL. So you're not stuck to just using Zamel, just using APL. You can intermix them. So we'll see all these things later as we go through. This is just a quick catch-up on all these terms. So the biggest difference about WPF is the way the objects are actually arranged. You can have it with a canvas where you specify where each object goes, with the top left corner, a height and width, in the same way we do with our current GUIs. And this is how the canvas works. Now, you can't see this, there's a box down here. What I've actually arranged is that black area at the bottom is in fact the canvas area. I've split the screen into 3 parts. The top part is the actual text thing. The middle section on the left is the APL, and on the right is the Zamel that's built it. We will go through this in more detail later. I'm just trying to explain the things at the moment. But the area at the bottom is a canvas that I've created with the black border around. And you can see that you can create objects that are outside the canvas, and obviously inside, and they just position where you put them. And this is very much as the current GUI goes. The order they're put depends on their height, where they appear in things, but you can change it so it goes below. You can change the Z index as well. And also, you can actually move them so they go from inside the canvas to outside. So even though you define an area of the screen you're writing to, you can actually move the things outside. That one is actually animated, moved up to outside the canvas, but also it's changed transparency. So you have a lot of flexibility in all these things. But that's a canvas. And then you have a StackPanel. So a canvas was used just to position things exactly where you want them on the screen, or on a portion of the screen. That is a fairly old-fashioned way of doing things, but for graphics and some other things you do need to do that. But the best way of using WPF are to use various layout panels, where you actually allow WPF to arrange things for you. And this is an example of a StackPanel. This is one of the simplest panels you can have. And all this does is just append the objects you add to the StackPanel. So again, bottom is the screen, is what I said was a panel. I've added the first text box. This one has got a horizontal alignment of stretch, which means it takes up all the space that's available to it. The next box, I've now specified that to be aligned on the left. You will notice that the StackPanel has now grown 2 rows to accommodate both objects. And again, I've added a third box, and again, you can see by the purple, the StackPanel is extended to take, but they have all gone in their relevant positions, and it just keeps growing. Now, StackPanel can be orientated so it's vertical as this. You can also do it horizontally. And so, again, you can see how you can position your boxes within, but actually the size is taken up by the text in the box and is worked out. But you still have the rectangular area around the outside, the purple, which shows you where the actual StackPanel is. And there will be no sizes specified there other than the size of the text boxes. A slightly more complex one is a DocPanel. Now this is effectively a StackPanel, but you can also dock the children that belong to it to any of the 4 sides. So again, here you've got the same one at the top, and then you've got a second box which is now being docked on the left. It looks very much like a StackPanel so far. And then you have a third one. Now this again has been added to the right, but you'll notice instead of going onto the third line, it's on the second line, taking up whatever space is available, and it has actually filled the whole area. And now you have the third. Because it's docked to the bottom, it goes to the bottom, and the fourth one, even though it was added afterwards, is above it and docked to the right. And you'll also notice that on the right-hand side, the fourth box is only taking up this middle row, while the second box is taking up both rows, because the order they're added to the DocPanel also determines when they're fighting for space, which one takes precedence. So again, by changing the order of adding or whatever, you can actually have the effect of the second box, where it covers 2 lines, or the fourth box, where it covers 1 line. I'm very conscious I'm beginning to speed up again. I'm trying to slow down. So that's basically how that works. And then you have something called a grid. Now this is the most flexible of the panels that comes out of the box. And this is the one that if you use things like expression blend and what have you, because they don't know what you're going to do, this is the one they tend to give you by default. Now this is very nice. This is slightly more expensive to use than a StackPanel. So depending on what you're doing with your GUI, sometimes you're better to use a StackPanel just for simplicity and whatever. If you're doing something more interesting, then you need a grid. And at the moment I have got grid lines on to show you the various cells of the grid. So you can see the dotted lines around. Again, I've done the same thing. I've got the purple behind to show you how the grid grows. At the moment, it's just these 1 row. I have added all the boxes. You notice as you add the boxes, they all go into that first cell. So by default, when you add them, all the cells go in the first one. And then you can allocate them to whichever cell you wish them to be. So the red one has stayed in the first top cell. I have put the second box in the second cell over here, and the third. Now you'll notice the third box is actually also, if you look at the dotted lines, is spanning across several cells. So you have the flexibility to join adjacent cells together when you're positioning your cells. And so the fourth box is taking up the whole box like that. So it's a very, and with the grid lines taken off, it's indistinguishable from other panels. But all the layout is given to you. And so you just supply it with the children, the buttons or whatever, the text boxes, and it will align them for you. So if you add something, if I put another box in there, it would just rearrange it and have the things without you having to say, I want to put it on the fourth row or the third, whatever, or worry about putting something in between.
I have the impression that when you first added the row definitions, and I could not see the rows. And when you put something into the row became visible and took space.
Yes, you basically specify what you're using, and you only actually see things when they're needed. And in the same way, the StackPanel grew to accommodate what it needs. The grid also grows to accommodate what it needs. So it uses real estate very efficiently. It only actually grows when it needs to grow. And the important thing at this point is, let's find that. So that's it. So, right. So those were the layouts, which is a very important concept to understand with WPF. And then you have all the controls you expect. And, for example, you have, for example, there's a button here that's been a thing, it just does the standard things. So you can do that. And also there's other ones, just a few to show you the checkbox, and you can check it if you wish or not. and you can, yeah. And radio buttons. I mean, these are all the standard controls you expect are there. You see how everything's readjusting when you, and tooltips are there. And there's some nice things like expanders, which you can do. This is just to show you that all the GUI objects, I mean, this is actually the less interesting part of the whole thing. And you can have trees, and you can do so on, and what have you. So those are just like that. So those are just to show you just a few of the controls. But all the controls you want to use are available. You have the way it deals with APL or with outside world is more subtle than the current GUIs. I mean, you have properties, but you have different types of properties. I'll deal with these a bit later in more detail. You have dependency properties, which can depend on other things. You have attached properties that come from other objects. You have rooted events rather than simple events, triggers, transforms, styles. These we'll all cover as we go through later. But the way the thing interacts with the outside world is much more subtle and interesting than other GUIs that come before it. Oops. Don't want that. And you have more complex ones that are available to you. I say this is a ribbon that's been provided. This is the ribbon that is a free one at the moment provided by Microsoft. I think there are slight problems at the moment with rendering and a few little things with speed and things, but it's their first attempt at producing a ribbon that's available. There are commercial products available which actually at the moment work slightly better than this, but this is a free one that comes with WPF, and I'm sure the second release will be better than this one. But again, they work in the same way. You can specify it so that, I think, is that not active? Probably. That's better. So you get tooltips. So the standard tooltips, so on. I'll show you how you create these in a minute. And also if you click on it, it does seem rather slow at the moment, but it is. And then you'll notice across the top here you have the standard quick access toolbar, and you'll see that these things are now at the moment grey. If you highlight some text, for example, you'll notice that this copy now has actually become active automatically, and so is one up there. It's actually only copy because this is actually read-only. If you come down to a text box down here, that's it. You type something in there. Okay. Yeah. So you took something there, and you then highlight this. You'll notice now cut and copy have become active because it knows that is actually read-write only. And if you actually copied those, the paste would become active. And again, if you did something to make your document so it needs saving, so for example, in this case, I just tick this box, you'll see that the save has now become active there, and in fact, it's also active on the drop-down box there. So the save, that was actually inactive. I should have shown that before. So, you have access to a ribbon as well. All right. Now, come down to more interesting things about how the controls themselves work. A control, like a button or any of these type of GUI things, have various properties that are associated with it. There are standard .NET properties that are just properties that you expect, where you set things and whatever. You have dependency properties. These are ones that it derives its value from several sources. It can derive its value. The ultimate one at the bottom is if you actually physically set it like a width. It can set its width from just being set, width gets something, or it can obtain it because it's grouped within another box that's got it clipped to boundaries or whatever. So width, for example, comes from, I think, about 10 different possibilities of how it calculates what the width is. So that it depends on other properties, effectively, how that gets its value. And dependency properties are very important with WPF because those are the ones within Zamel that you can animate. They're the ones you can do other things with. There are very few standard static .NET properties, but there are a few. And if you want to know which of the dependency properties, these are ones that have the word property at the end, where you have content property or something property. These are the ones that are tend to be dependency properties rather than static ones. And you all have something called attached properties. When we go through the code, you will notice that there are some properties that have got two names with a dot in between them. This means they're not native to that particular control, but they have been attached from another control because they're useful properties to have. I'll explain that a bit later when we go through. Events also come in different flavors. You have events that just click and happen. You also have something called tunneled rooted events. And these are ones where if a click occurs on a button, the event doesn't only happen on that button, it actually happens on all of the controls up to the very top of the tree. And if you, some of them also go down, so they occur at the top of the tree. If a button was clicked, the preview event of that click actually starts at the top of the tree and fires on each of the events down to the bottom. So you have to be a little bit careful when dealing with events. If you set an on condition in WPF, it's not exactly the same as setting an on in the current GUIs. It doesn't just affect the line during, it also fires at either all above or below the event that occurred. And you also have events that are attached from somewhere else. For example, if you had 3 buttons on a window, a form, then if you clicked one of those buttons, the event can be handled either at the button level, or you can handle the event for all 3 buttons at the window. Now, a window doesn't naturally have an event for click, but you can attach the buttons event to the window to handle it that way. And then you have something called commands, and these are, basically as it says there, detached events, where it's like the cut and the copy and the paste. These aren't really associated with a particular control, they're more an application-wide event. And commands are actually very important. In the Microsoft world, most of the things that happen in applications are commands rather than events. And there are lots of supplied commands, like cut and copy. All those cut and copies that were shown on the ribbon, they all came with about 10 characters. It said command equals cut. And you've got all that functionality just by specifying the command. And so they're very powerful. But they are effectively like events. So we now go back to the layouts, and we now go through the APL a little bit more. This is exactly the same screen that you saw before, but all I've done is I have just changed the size of the various parts. So now I've eliminated all that boring text at the top, and we just now have the APL. And here I've tried to put the Zamel alongside the APL so you can compare the two. And, for example, you can see there's the second row on the right, you've got canvas, name equals canvas, height equals 85, and so on. You can see at the top on the APL, you've got canvas gets new canvas, then canvas dot height width gets 85 and whatever. So these two are fairly comparable to start with and will produce the same picture at the bottom. The one on the right will actually produce the final version. The reason I'm using the APL is because I don't want all 4 boxes to appear. If I use the Zamel that's on the right, that would generate all the 4 boxes and will give me a completed GUI. You will notice that 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 lines down on the right-hand side, there's canvas.top. That is an example of an attached property rather than a property, because top isn't really a property associated with that text box. It is only applicable if it's within a canvas. So it acquires the positioning information, if you like, from the containing object, a canvas. And so the text box has a property called canvas.top, but it's not really natural to the text box, because within any other layout, it would not have any meaning. And so you can always spot them with the canvas.top. Now you'll notice on the left-hand side with the APL, there's a canvas.setTop. So canvas is not the name of the canvas object I've created, because it's a lowercase c. It is actually the generic notion of a canvas. And so you have a function or method with that thing called setLeft. So every attached property where you have canvas.top, it translates into canvas.setLeft. So wherever in Zamel you see canvas.top, you can use canvas.setTop in APL. And it needs 2 pieces of information. It needs the text box and it needs the position. In the same way you have canvas.top within the text box and it's set to 80, you can see that I have done the same thing with the APL. And you can see I've set a border. Within the Zamel, it has to be specified as an outer element of canvas. And again, the same thing I'm doing there. I've got border gets canvas set border, and I have to add the border in the same way there. So the two sides are fairly thing. The only thing you have to watch, things like margin and padding, you'll notice I've said quad new thickness. On the Zamel, it just says equals 3. We'll reduce somewhere at the top there, top right. This is because the Zamel spots the equals 3 and knows the margin needs to convert it. And so this is where typing gets a little bit in the way, just here, with the, and it's a little bit ugly, I think, within .NET. But you do have to specify that margin and padding are of type thickness. It's how thick they are. And so you have to create an object called thickness, which is value 3. You cannot say margin gets 3, for example. That's just a little quirk of the thing. And then at the bottom, I've got canvas.children.add, and adding the first text box. This is why you get the first text box. And if you go on, you get the second box. You see, I just added the second text box. Adding the third text box. And you'll see the set left and whatever. I'm now positioning, so I actually moved it. So I actually moved it to that position. And you'll see here now, Canvas doesn't actually have a concept of a Z index, but Canvas happens to be inherited from Panel, which is the very basic of the layouts. And there I can change this, use another attached property. Again, the text box doesn't have the concept of where it is, but a Panel does. And so you can use the attached property panel.setIndex, and you can change the position, and so on. And again, you see I've done all the adds here. You can, this here, add 1, 2, 3, is equivalent to doing the for each, like so. So the APL can, it looks very verbose there, but it can be reduced into quite a short bit of APL if you're working with it.
What all those functions actually return since you're obviously suppressing the output?
Oh, in the case of adding children, it actually returns the position that child is added. So, for example, the first time I used example.children.add, that would return 0. They use quad IO 0. And then if I did it add again, I'd get a 1. And in the case where I did this for each, because TB contained 4 text boxes, I'd get 0, 1, 2, 3 back. So it's just needless to get rid of those. And again here, go down. This is when I actually now create my fourth one, the yellow box, if you remember. Somewhere here, yes. And then this is where I'm setting the text to red. If you remember when I actually create it. Oops, I was on too far. So what it is. Not what I wanted it to do. Wait a minute. Get to the point, right point. Yeah, right. Sorry about that. So I've added the fourth box. Now, so, it's doing it now. Unfortunately, I was going to show you that before you did it. Here, basically, I wanted to animate that fourth text box. So here, I've actually set the color to red. So the color went from black to red. Here, I've actually encased my animation in a function, which I can show you how that works later. And this one is changing the top property. That's the top where the thing's positioned. And I want it to go from its current position to position minus 100, so it goes outside the canvas, because this is 0, 0. And I want it to take 10 seconds to get there, and I want it to have no delay, and I want this is transparent here, so that's changing the colour. So yes, that's right. So here I'm actually, this is taking the background colour object, that's a brush, and I'm basically changing it to transparency. So that is doing the animation there. I'll explain animation a bit later. And so this is just saying begin animation, and it just moves, that one is actually the one that moves the colour. I'll show that in a minute.
So these 3 lines are actually 1?
No, there's 3 lines. That one is from there to there, so it wraps. This is doing the colour. This is changing the colour from, the background colour from yellow to transparent. And then that is doing, where's the other one? And that's doing the begin, and then this is changing the position. There, I did that. So, yes, so that's doing the 2 things. That's doing the setting up the thing there, the animation for the canvas, the property there. So those are the 2. That's one, that's the other. That's that line there, from there to there. That's what I'm doing now. So that is the animation for the positioning, and this one here is the animation for the transparency. I have actually covered the gubbins of the animation within a small function there, but I can show you that later.
So that code just initiates the animation?
This function sets up the animation, and the line below begins the animation. That initiates the animation there. So this is setting up what you need, and then this actually starts it.
But the positioning and the changing the color are happening simultaneously?
Yes, I'm setting up 2 animations, one for the color, and these can run simultaneously. So there are 2 animations going on. Animation only changes one property at any one time. So, but you can run as many as you want. And then again, the StackPanel creating a new stack panel. Again, here you've got the stack panel, and the names are the same. I put a border around. I did that so you can see the thing growing. And then you're adding the border. This is doing the horizontal stretch, so the first panel, and you're adding the first one, so you get that. This is adding the second one. Again, the Zamel here is doing all of them at the beginning. And this is the third one. This is the APL again, adding the fourth. Again, you'll just see I'm supposed to... and this is something quite useful. You'll see here there's the horizontal alignment is a property of this text box. Now, normally you have to know that it's left, right, and you'll be, in standard GUI you tend to set 1s or 2s, whatever. The enumeration can actually be obtained either from the property itself. So if you hear, I'm actually setting... I'm using reader here, but if you use an object has the property horizontal alignment, I could have easily have put in there 4TB, which perhaps would have been better for this example, dot horizontal alignment, and then you'll see I put dot center. That's actually saying I'm centering this object. So every object or a property within the WPF, if you actually do a dot quad NL -2, which is actually finds all the properties of an object, will actually tell you all the possibilities. So if you wanted to do an alignment, if I wanted to find out what the possible horizontal alignments were, if I typed in horizontal alignment dot quad NL -2, it will actually tell me the stretch, left, right, or whatever. And this applies to all the different objects you can use. So in this case, I just specified that I want to use center. And here I've specified top in the same way. And again, this docking is another attached property. So you'll see over here in the Zamel, I have used doc dot doc. So whenever you see a dot, it means it's an attached property, not a true property. So if you actually see the dot, when you're looking in the documentation for that property, you actually have to go and look at the DocPanel to see the definition of that property, not the text box you're expecting it to be. So it's very important when you look at the documentation, if it's a single name, you go to the actual object, like text box, to look for the property description. If it's a dot in the middle, it's an attached property, and you have to go and look at the DocPanel to find the definition. And here again, you'll see that there is a setDoc function or method available for the DocPanel. And the rest is the same. So again, whether you use Zamel or whether you use APL, you can choose to do whichever you like. Again, this is all very much the same stuff. And the grid is a little more interesting. You'll see on this side that, again, I'm setting the background to plum so you can see it growing. And again, this is setting grid lines to true. On this side, somewhere along there, there'll be a grid line set to 1. Yep, there. And again, here you've got, when you define a grid, you specify how many rows you want the grid to contain. There's 4 rows here. On this side, I've added them here. And columns again, I've added them there. Again, you've got the various text boxes defined here. And I've got them defined before. I haven't bothered to define them there. They're using the previous ones I set up. And here, this is how you set the rows and columns. Within this, you just say grid.col equals 0 and grid.row equals 0. Under this, you say grid.setRow, the text box you want to set, and you want to put it 0. So it's exactly the same technique for setting the grids. So the Zamel and the APL tend to be very much a one-to-one relationship. So although the Zamel looks very un-APL-like, when you're working with them, you can translate back and forwards fairly easily. And see more of the APL there. Because then again, at the bottom I set the grid lines to 0 and the grid lines disappeared. Thank you. Right, now this is the ribbon code that I did. So this is the build ribbon. Now, the ribbon needs another window because if you notice when you looked at the ribbon, the very top title bar contains the quick access menu. So Microsoft have produced another window. It's 4 in the standard GUI. And so you can't use window if you're using ribbon because if you want those quick access menus, they have to be written in the title bar. So, and this is how you just say new ribbon. And then you set, now, you'll notice here I'm using actual width here, rather than width. This is because width is a dependency property, I said before. And so width itself may not be set. And so quite often I find this irritating. But if you have not set width directly yourself, then width does not exist as far as WPF is concerned, only works out when it's using it. And so it's best to use something called actual width rather than width. It's just something to warn you of if you're playing with this. If you type in rw.width, you sometimes get a value error because the rendering process hasn't gone through and worked these things out. And so sometimes you have to use actual width. It's a very strange quirk, but I just warn you of that. And then here you'll see on line 4, which is the interesting one, I've got ribbon.quickAccessToolbar gets Zamel, QXOT. And if we look at that, you'll see Zamel. So what I've done now is I've got my APL, I've created my ribbon window, I've created my ribbon, and I'm too lazy to work out how to populate a ribbon. So I've gone to the Microsoft MSDN, and I've just found some Zamel that they give as documentation, and I've used that rather than bothering to work out how to do this myself, to be honest. And so I've just taken this Zamel from, ignore the first line, that one is just me heading it up. It starts from here. Whoops. I may have to go there. Come back to that one. Just to catch up. So here I've actually now defined the ribbon quick access toolbar, and you'll see the 3 lines I showed you before. That this is like setting the quad path in Zamel. And then you then have the various buttons defined. So you have the first button that's labeled save, command save, and you have small image source and large image source. That depends, again, when it's resizing the ribbon. Sometimes the ribbon decides to choose to display a large image, sometimes it decides to choose a small image. So you tend to supply whichever ones it's going to need. And then there's things like key tips and tool tips and so on. So all of that is defined in one button. This is defining a second button and a third button. And this is all in Zamel. And I say, I was just too lazy to actually find out how to type all that in. And if I wanted to modify this, I could change this. You know, I wanted a different button, different name. I could change that much more easily than working out what it's doing. So this is all the Zamel for that. And so but what I've done is, the important thing is, if you go back to the APL, yeah, all I have done is I've just loaded that bit of Zamel. So it has created a quick access toolbar. So this I've assigned to the ribbon, this property, is expecting a quick access toolbar object. And so I have this case, I have used the Zamel from the QAT. I have loaded the Zamel, and I've assigned the objects created to the toolbar. So I'm using APL quite happily, but I've actually used a bit of Zamel I pinched from somebody else. And again, this is the document, which is actually just the text. Now this stars at the top, which we'll cover later. Okay? And then this is just the text, standard. This is the bit that was displayed beneath the ribbon. Again, I just basically took something else and just put a bit of rubbish APL in there and bits to do with WPF to show what, just show some content. What else is there? And then these is just the simple APL callbacks that I used, because if you go back to the, I should show that, back to beyond this one. Yeah. There should be, I think. Which one did I do? I did save these prints. It's actually, it's not on that one. It is on the application menu. Oh, here. Now, one thing that is difficult within using APL as opposed to the Zamel is actually locating where things are stored. So this is not WPF. This is me post-processing the Zamel when it's loaded, because I want to make my application so it can be moved anywhere you like. So my loading of Zamel actually spots the was path and actually gives the full path of that name to find it. So that's actually some post-processing I've decided to do with the Zamel. And you'll notice further down here, there is Morton's trick, oops, lost it. Morton's trick of putting a del in front of the function. So again, when this is loaded into the workspace, you cannot actually specify APL callbacks within the Zamel. You have to basically take them out when it's loaded and then put them back when it's thing. But again, it's all done under the hood so you don't notice. Now, the only thing you have to be wary of doing things like this, and the thing I showed you before, is this symbol, unfortunately, isn't accepted by expression blend. So you'd have to come to some arrangement over which symbol you were using if people were designing stuff with things like expression blend and Visual Studio. They only allow you the alphanumerics and a few other limited characters. And so if you did that within expression blend, it would come back and say that's an invalid character. But I mean, I'm sure you can think of another character apart from that one. Yeah. That's just their products. So this, I mean, this is it. So I mean, and again, all the functions are very, very trivial. That's a message box which is given to you free, and you have to make it a string, so you have to enclose it. That's sometimes is a little annoying, but you have sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. I haven't quite worked out the logic of when you do. And then the interesting thing are these two things at the bottom. Perhaps I should go back and find one. A command. Show you a command. Yeah. Here you've got command equals cut, for example. That is all you need to put in to make cut or copy work. Because Microsoft, all the standard commands that you use, like cut, copy, and those sort of things, are all given for you for free. And they come with WPF. And there's also a spelling checker in there for text boxes and all those sort of things. And the way you implement that, you have to provide two callbacks. One is can execute. These are names you specify somewhere, I'll show you in a minute, where effectively you determine whether it's true or not. And if there's a property called can execute, which you have to specify, you know, you could say if the document change is not the same as the one on file or whatever. I've just said if the this technique here, so perhaps I ought to explain. You notice in the Zamel, you specify names of objects. If I go back to the Zamel. Right. Name. Names. Well, you can actually have cases where name equals. I can't remember where there is one. There must be one somewhere because I used it there. It's the save. Where's the save? I should have done, but I didn't have time to do that. This has all been rather thrown together, I have to say. But anyway, actually, I know what it is. It's the document. Isn't it? In here, I have actually put the save button. Within the document, in this case, because it was the easiest way to actually determine whether the thing is, somewhere at the top there's checkbox there. I've actually included checkbox, and then you see name equals need save. Right? So that's a checkbox, which is that checkbox I said for the save on or off when you saw the ribbon screen. I go back to here. Okay. Then this is a way of finding that object within your Zamel. So I had labelled that checkbox need save, and so I specified within the document I needed to find that. So this actually returns back a reference to that checkbox. And so that is a reference to checkbox, and then I'm just asking for a property is checked. And that returns a 1 or a 0, depending on what, I suppose I'm indeterminate, but in this case it returns 1 or 0 for yes or no. And so I'm saying that this is either 1 or 0 if it's true. So as soon as I put a tick in that checkbox, this runs basically in the background whenever there's no processing going on. So it picks up that something has happened. And if I have specified that any command that has been specified as save will become active. If that is 0, and it's 0 by default, it's inactive. And so it's a very quick way of activating or deactivating a particular command anywhere within your application.
So how often is it going to be called? Every time there's any kind of event?
It's sort of just, it's a bit like putting a time on 0 where it's in the background and just every now and then it just sort of happens. It doesn't want to be a big function. I mean, it really is just to see if a condition happens like that. It's just a one that just runs very quickly, and it just runs in the background. It's not supposed to interfere with what's going on. It's the recommended Microsoft way of doing it. I don't think it affects the speed that much, but it doesn't want to be a large processing function. And then effectively, when that is true, this function is the actual callback that does the work. And what I do there is just set it to 0 so it becomes inactive because I've saved the document, so therefore we haven't made any changes in this context. And then I just send it not saying it's been saved. So that's the way that they work. And the way you actually then connect them to your system, it's in this one. Yeah, combined bindings. You can specify at which point of the tree you want this to take effect. Normally it's done at the very top level, so therefore it becomes system-wide. And what you do is you specify. You have to create a new command binding, and you'll see this application commands.save in this case. and I have to specify the can execute callback and the executed callback, and then I add them, and this is now added to the top of the ribbon. And that basically is all you need to make the commands work, that particular command. So that's how the commands are specified within the system. Now then, this is the difficult one. This is mostly used in the Zamel, and it's the nasty one to explain easily and so you don't go to sleep. Zamel itself is quite static, it's XML, but it's always necessary that one piece of Zamel needs to refer to another piece of Zamel. i.e., in a combo box you want to know the values, and you want, if you select one, you want that value reflected in a text box somewhere, or something like that. And the way that you would do that is you use something called binding. And within Zamel you will see width equals curly bracket, some rubbish, close curly bracket. And that means that that width, or whatever property, has been bound to something else. And this is the way that Zamel will actually tell you how it's bound. And it is very heavily overloaded. It's used for connecting properties to other properties. It's used for connecting properties to database fields and all sorts of things. I have actually found on the internet, and here you can look at, about 3 or 4 pages of a cheat sheet of binding. And I recommend that if anybody is seriously doing anything with WPF, then they get that downloaded off the internet, which is actually very useful. And for example, the first one, it's binding the element name of some text box using the property text, and this would probably be another text box text equals this string. So that if I wanted to keep 2 text boxes in line, then I could give the property text of the first box this string, and it would connect to that one and would automatically update. So if I ever changed the text in some text box to something else, the property that had been referred to would actually also update. And then you have the interesting things of the second one down, this is where it gets really hairy, where rather than specifying names, which is very, very restrictive, you can actually say that the property is relative to the property I'm defining. So if I've got a text box that I want it to be connected to something else, so to itself, another property with itself, then I can actually say that it's bound to a relative source. The relative source is myself, so relative source self, and path equals name. So you can actually connect one property to another property. Or you can connect it to an ancestor, so you can connect it to a window further up, or another button further up, or you can specify the second ancestor. I say I find it a very clumsy, ugly way of doing things, but it's because the Zamel is very static. They needed some way of building in this sort of small event handling connectivity that doesn't come naturally with XML, and this was their solution. And then you'll see at the bottom there's the grid.dataContext. This you need to know if you're using Zamel with data sources like databases and that sort of thing, where if you're training a data object from file, like a customer or something, you have a customer thing where you have details like name, address, and those sort of things, then this is in an object. And what you do is you say the grid has the data context of that object. And then, from then on, within that section, you can then say at the bottom that field, text box 1 equals binding field X. And then the contents of that text box will be the contents of that field. So if you read another record from a database into that object, automatically through this binding, that the text would be going into that box. A horrible thing to have to explain. It's going to get very boring this bit. But I say, that's all binding is. It's a way of specifying how you join 2 things together, obviously in the name. But it is a very clumsy, I think, syntax for a static Zamel. And I say this is probably one of the reasons why you would use APL rather than Zamel, but it's what people want to do. All right. And then you have things like resources. This is really an efficiency thing in this case. Now, for example, every object, every panel has a resources property where you can store things like brushes and colours and things. Rather than keep creating them each time and using memory resources and those sort of things, you can specify that there's a brush, background brush is its name, colour red. And so then when you actually use that, you then say your Zamel, you could say border brush equals static resources, again the curly brackets, border brush. And this would then go to your resources and would find this particular brush and would set that property to red. If it's a static, it does it once, and if you then change your resource, it wouldn't change with it. If you make it a dynamic resource, then it would change each time. But there are overheads for using dynamic resources, so it depends on which you use. And again, there's also these things here. So the important thing to note is that if you're using resources, it is a database where you have X key is the actual name of the thing you're storing, and then you have the content. But where you have X key here, you would use it with just the name when you're using it. So it's a way of linking the two together. And then we have a data grid, for example, here. So this is just a simple grid which has been built like this, a data table. And then I've specified here the columns. So you've got first, second, and third. This is a bit of dynamic functions to link the two together. So you're adding the columns, and you'll see that they're here. And you have to specify the type at the moment of the columns. And then I just built some dummy data, 25 rows of rubbish, just to show you. And then this is something using a very nice thing from Dyalog. I don't know if anybody knows the I-beams 2011 and 2010, but they're very useful because what you have to do is you have to create, whenever you're dealing with data within .NET, you use things called data tables and data views. And data table is effectively a table that is just enclosed within an object, and you have to refer to it that way. And normally you have to refer to each row at a time. So if you're appending data to a data table, you would normally say, put row 1 in, and put row 2 in, and put row 3 in. And if you've got a lot of data, it can be very slow. And so Dyalog very kindly wrote these two I-beams, so that actually it just goes in one lot rather than row by row. So that is creating your data table. This is your data here, and you'll notice that I'm putting it in here. So where under normal .NET you would have to loop through data, putting each row in, this I-beam will just put it in for you. And then you create the data grid, which is this thing here. I'm specifying in this case a height, a width, and margin because I just wanted it exactly in that box there. And again, a thickness for the margin. I'm docking it to the top. And then here, I'm actually setting a data view. Whenever you have a data table, that's basically if you just think of a table, when you want to use that data, you actually refer to it, it's almost like a view onto that. And you can have different data views of that same data. So you only ever have the data once in an object, but you can have multiple views. And so I'm actually creating, in this case, it's the default view, so it's the whole thing. And here, I'm actually setting, DG is the data grid, I'm setting item source, setting the data view. So this is actually setting that data to be displayed by this grid. And then that's just when the cells are finished editing, that's a callback. So if we come down here, so for example, if I wanted to look at the information in row 1, it should just give you the first row. And if I want to change that, it's very boring really. And again, update. And updates it. Yeah. Right? So it shows how a data grid can work with two text boxes. And this is just done. This is just done here. So for example, this is the read button. If you look up here, I specified. So this is the I-beams I was saying about here. This is the run selection. This is the upgrade. This is the callback for the update button. So all I'm doing is just executing the contents of the text box. This is called rows and data, and then reshaping it through. So it's all very simple APL, using the properties in exactly the same sort of way you'd use normal ones. So that's that. And then we have things like styles, templates, skins, and themes, and they have all these sort of names. Now, the very important thing about WPS, again, it's different to the previous GUIs, is that all the controls, the buttons, the expanders, all the other controls, are something called lookless. And this means that these controls a button will always click and will always generate a click event. That's the only thing that's fixed about a button, is that you click it and it will generate a click event. Whether it's square, whether it's circular, whether it's pink, whether it rotates and spins, doesn't matter. That is purely what it looks like. And as far as WPF is concerned, you can make your objects look, or controls look exactly as you want, but a button will always click, and etc., etc. So, if you want to actually change your buttons into square buttons and purple things, and that if they come across that, these are still buttons, and they'll still click. And this is how you, I won't walk up to that, but, and again, this is the code here that will do that. You can specify a style. So again, you've got a stack panel to put them in, same as we've done before. Again, that resources, again, where these things are put. You specify a key, and it's a button style, and you'll say it only applies to buttons. And then you've got your style triggers, and you've got here, if mouse over, so if it goes over, then you do a render transform, and you change the angle by 10 degrees. So, yeah. And also, the property goes, the foreground goes to black, so the number goes black. And also, the font size is 22, I'm not quite sure. This is your, it says purple and white is the standard. And then this is how you use it. So that's the resources. So that's defining your style for this button. And then you just say button style equals static resource button style. So it goes up here and finds in the resources, button style, and it uses this. So you can actually, just by specifying button style equals this style here, you can actually give this appearance to all the buttons you specify that for. So it's a very quick way of modelling and changing the looks of your buttons. So this bit here is purely saying I want to use the buttons, and is defining the buttons. And the static resources above is actually specifying that when you put a mouse over it, this is what you want it to happen. And then you also have something called template. Now, these should be circular, it's just that I ran out of space, so they're a bit squeezed in at the moment. But you see they do sort of interesting things. But it's still a button, and if you click it, it still gives you a button click. And you bother to put on the first one. So that's still a button. And again, it's a grid. This time instead of stack panel, you've got your resources, and you've got your key in the same way. It's a template now. Only applies to buttons. And then you have your description of how you build. So you've got an ellipse, outer circle, and you've got different ways of colouring it. And again, you've got your binding for colour. And this is saying that the colour is actually taken from the templated parent. So whatever colour you specify on the button is the colour you should use, rather than anything you're playing with within. So you can actually use the properties of the real button that you're redefining. So that's what this is saying here. When it says templated parent, it's saying the colour property I'm using within this is the colour property that somebody specified outside. So in this case, I'm using a colour, but it's the colour that is specified by the user of this control, not by something this template is defining. So if I wanted it to be red, then I can specify this as being as red when I was using it, or I can specify it's blue or whatever. So this is a way of saying the colour property is taken from the control I'm changing, not something I'm specifying. While here, and I said it's going to be red. So that is ignoring whatever a user sets as a property. But up here, I'm actually using the one that's actually specified by the user. And what it's saying is relative source, and it's the templated parent. And it goes down. And then you've got the transforms and things to do the various clever bits. And again, the content is still using the padding from the user as opposed to the control, so the template. So here, the user who's using this button can specify the padding around the button. It's not controlled by the template. So that's the meaning of that. And I say, it just works like a button. And when you're doing transformations of buttons, you have two types. You have the one that happens before everything's calculated, and one happens afterwards. So if you have a layout transform, this is basically saying, I've got a button, I want to change it by, 45 degrees or something. If you use a layout transform, you actually work out how much space the button is going to take up when it has been rotated by 45 degrees. So obviously it's going to be a larger height to the button. And if you have a render transform, you basically work out where the button fits. and then you change it. So then it would actually probably overwrite another control. Sometimes you want them to overlap, sometimes you don't. So you have the choice of specifying your transforms either before everything has been calculated position-wise, or afterwards. And so that's just what that's for. And then, I've actually finished, I've probably finished well within the 2 hours. Nobody asked any questions. These are some books that I found useful. There's WPF4, I've got them here, if anyone wants to look at them. I'm also going to leave them on the Dyalog stand, so that if anybody wishes to look through them, they're welcome to. Now, my PC, unfortunately, hasn't got internet connection, so I can't show you. I don't think it's got an internet connection that I can borrow. But this is actually, it gives you the documentation. I was hoping, you know how to get, because I can't get onto the... Right. Because this one refuses to connect up to the LAN. Because I wanted to really show you the bottom one as well, which is the Microsoft has all this fully documented. Well, fully is probably a wrong word, but everything you just about need is actually on MSDN, and as long as you know how to translate the two together, then you can find out ribbons, you can find out about the buttons and the properties. One thing I have forgotten to tell you going through, and that was on the rooted events, because you have to be very careful with those, as I said, because they fire at all the different levels up the tree. So if you have a button within a stack panel, within whatever, going up to a window, if you click the button at the bottom, that click event will, unless you do something, occur at all the levels up the tree, so that you can handle buttons at a window level or whatever level you want. You have to, in your event handler, specify it as handled, and it won't then go any further. But you have something called preview events that exist within the system, and these ones fire before the actual events. You'll notice if you look at the properties within an object, you have a click and you have a preview click, or a text change and a text change, all good. That's what I want. You can connect that through, it'll be useful. And what happens is, if you change text in the text box, then it fires two events. It triggers the preview text change, and it then triggers the text change event. And what happens is, the preview text event occurs first. This starts a window and comes down to the button that created the change. And this can be handled, and if it's handled, it doesn't fire the text change. So if you were doing some validation on a text form and someone typed an A or a B in, and they weren't supposed to type an A or B, it had to be a number, then the preview event can be used to track that, and then can cancel the other one, and then you don't actually see the A appearing in the thing where you typed. Anyway, this is the control library, and this is the sort of thing that you can get from Microsoft, and you'll see that once you get to the control library, you have all the different border, and you've got canvas there. And so if you go to canvas, Right, and then you see you can actually get all the description. Yeah? Really weird when you're walking backwards. Scroll down.
You want the Microsoft one?
What? I just wanted to look at the remarks and the attachments, try and scroll down. I can't drive them out. I need to scroll down.
I never did with my head in my neck.
No. I was having the same trouble. Oh no, it's not just me. But to say, every object within WPF is documented like this, and you get the various remarks, examples. You get these. Go back. It's a bit there.
Page up.
No. Go page down. The Zamel I wanted to see. Page down. Halfway. You'll see here it gives you an example in Zamel, and there's also some. It's actually C, unfortunately, rather than APL. But this is all the examples. You've got everything there, and you'll see that you've got the attached properties, and you've got font size. It's how you use it. And if you go down further, you'll then also have. That's it. Go a bit further. There should be a thing that says members. Reference. See Canvas members. If you go to Canvas members, click on that. That actually gives you all the properties, all the methods, and everything else for Canvas. You get that? Good. So here you've got the methods. So you've got all these various methods going down that you can use. Add is the one I think we need to look at first. Somewhere there, range. Slowly. So you have again. You see you have the get bottom. You've got the functions there that we were using, get top and so forth, that you need for the attached properties. They're all sort of here. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Is that the end?
No, it's not. Just use the cursor keys.
All right. As you can see, there's lots of things you can do with these things. At the bottom. Somewhere here. Come on.
Almost halfway.
Don't want me on. And then you have fields and properties. So you have all these things here for actual height and background for colour and so on. They're all documented. And there could be a thing about attached properties somewhere.
Is this supposed to make us happy?
Yeah, I'm just showing you. And then you have the attached properties. So you have them separated out. So you have the properties and they have the attached properties. So you have things, as I say, the bottom, left, top, and right, so I was expressing. So these are the ones, these 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, are the ones with the dots. So you'd actually say canvas dot top, or whatever. So they are separated out and they are documented separately so you can see what's what. And then you have all the events, and there's another one. But I'm just saying, this is where you find all the various stuff. How do I go back now? Yeah. So it is all documented if you find it. This is on that website I showed you. That's what I wanted to show you actually. I think it'll be fine, thank you. So, I mean, really, that's all I have to say at the moment, unless anybody has any questions. I've gone through rather quickly.
2 questions. One, what design is the SAM file? The SAM files are not by browsers?
Yes, they are.
The other one is it easy to post something in time and print it?
Yes. There is actually a method so you can print any visible object. So if you wanted to print a button, you can just print the button. If you want to print a window, you just print a window. And there's one method that will print any control. So if you wanted to actually just say, give somebody a window screen print shot, there's just one method that will print the screen. If you want to print a grid within that, you can just print the grid. And the document that you saw there's a nice way of paginating that. You can transfer that straight into something called XPS, which is like PDF. It's the sort of Microsoft version of that. So it is very flexible and you have all those facilities.
In designing user interfaces, particularly writing code,
Yeah.
I find it to be awfully tedious. And visual tools, like the Visual Studio stuff, layout tools are terrific. So what can I lay out my form, my user interface with Visual Studio, save it as Zamel, and
Yes, you can either use something called Expression Blend, which is supposed to be slightly easier than Visual Studio. It takes out all of it. You can either create it using both Expression Blend, there's Visual Studio. There are some free ones around, there's K-Aximal or something like that, which you can find on the web. There are various other Zamel editors. You can build your entire GUI interface that way. You can build parts of your interface that way. So if there's one particular page that is complex that you want your users to define, you can and you can get them to specify all the callbacks if you want, so they can give names to them, and then you can write your callbacks yourself. So you can separate out totally the task of designing the GUI to the code definition, and then link the two together. Or you can do, as I did there with the third example, you can write small bits in Zamel and let them design that, and then you can link it all together with the APL and write other bits in APL and mix and match. Anything else? Good.
Another question. Is there, does the Windows event viewer work with?
Say again?
the event viewer in Dialog, our events.
Oh, I don't know.
Event viewer, is there some kind like an event viewer? So you can view the events.
Understand what's this question?
I don't know, JD might know the answer to that.
Certainly the API event viewer doesn't give any information, and I don't think that the actual have anything. I think they're not events in the same way that Windows process effects are essentially just tools through function tools, so they are. I don't think they're necessarily as effective as the same asynchronous way as function tools without the operating tools. More than a stack. There's no just I think that's how my experience is that's not the case. So the actual focus is
You could construct your own layer, I suppose, at least for commands.
Yes, you can actually write your own events, you can construct all these things, you can raise events, so you have complete flexibility. You say you can write your own individual commands, you can write events, you can customize everything. And so you can provide to somebody else. So yes, I mean you could put something in between. Actually.
Is there any provisions that undo redo?
Yes, there is. Application commands.undo and application commands.redo. They're given to you as commands supplied by Microsoft. So in the same way you saw cut and paste and copy, I showed you, there are two commands for. So all you would have to do is say command equals redo, command equals undo, and all your text boxes will have it automatically. Yeah. So everything's extensible. You can use it very simply, like a standard GUI now, and you can grow and do more things as you get more competent with it. It really is something that will grow, and you can do actually anything with it, just about, I think. So, but it can also be simple. I think the hardest thing that people would fall over is this rooted event business, where events fire places where you aren't expecting them, because normally within APL, if an event fires on a button, it fires on a button, and it doesn't fire anywhere else. So you have to be very careful that your event, if it fires on a button somewhere down your visual hierarchy, if you like, it will fire all the way up.
But why is that a problem unless you set up callbacks at all that? You're only going to get the callback where you...
No, if you've got a couple of buttons in your hierarchy that are different, you've got an on-click set there and on-click set there, yes? That on-click will also fire. If you've got a complex GUI where you've got a group of buttons there, and you've got a group of buttons in a larger frame, so for example, you've got 3 buttons for scrolling here, and you've got an update or something
so it's
outside.
Not just a hierarchy, it's also...
Well, no, you can still have it within the hierarchy, because you could have it built... You could have a frame with, say, scrolling buttons, and then outside that frame you can have your save and update. And though that thing is still sort of potentially below. I'm just saying, there are cases where you could have things, text boxes in different parts of... But no, buttons is one people think of the clicks, but perhaps a text changed or something.
You'd only get that if you had a button with a button on the side.
Yeah. Yes. No, it is... Yes, you can do anything like that. So you have to make sure that if you don't want your event to travel, you have to set it as handled. Now, the nice thing is also, it does still travel, it's just they ignore. Any handlers further up the tree do ignore it, but you can actually specify that an event will listen. So if you want a logging mechanism further up your tree, you can still listen to events. So you can actually, so even though you say it's handled, what it means is, if a text change in a text box down here happens, you handle it with your event handler, you don't specify the handled property as 1, it will then travel up your tree. Then if you set it to handled, it will appear to stop, but it actually carries on, and then the other events ignore it unless they have been marked that they will still handle it. So it is the event handling is a little tricky until you get the hang of it. But that's the only bit.